Hello everyone! Recently I have seen this tweet from Nyara, also known as NyaraVT, which is her message to men, and in this video I will make my response to it. Let's begin. So, the first point of contention, or rather point of failure, is that in her tweet she lists off a generic category of, quote, red pill podcasters, unquote, without defining who they are, what they stand for, and if they're really red pill in the sense we MGTOWs would understand it. This is observed in the part of the tweet saying, quote, you deserve love, but you will never find it if you listen to red pill podcasters, unquote. However, you see the problem here. The category of red pill podcasters, as was listed, is so generic and vague it does nothing to show to anyone what political ideology or beliefs is being talked about, or what ideology is being pushed, and whether said ideology is red pill in the way we understand it or not. The reason I say this is that the realm of, quote, red pill, unquote, is far larger than MGTOW itself. If you just meant red pill, you could be talking about anything from my channel, Sandman, Barbar, Coltane, and anyone else, to as far as those like Fresh and Fit, despite both groups having not much in common. Secondly, there is the problem of the assumption that people inherently deserve something, and that the Manosphere is where said thing, in this case love, is sought out. If you say that people deserve something and say that with the intent of meaning that they inherently deserve something, instead of working for it, you open up the problem of entitlement, and you're in effect implying that a specific group of people have a specific entitlement towards a specific thing. This is a dangerous thing to suggest, as the reason there is a problem with the incels is because they feel entitled to relationships, love, and sex from women, even if they are not, and even if they get rightfully rejected. Such a position, and thus the trap of entitlement, is something that should be avoided as much as possible. We have seen the issue of incels and prefer not to repeat the mistakes they made as a people. We men, as a gender, and also as a people group, in my view, are the ones who have always worked towards getting what we have in life and succeeding in it. It wasn't just handed to us at a silver platter, and I see no reason for that to change. Furthermore, in her tweet, she suggests the Manosphere itself is the problem, and that its purpose is to trap, isolate, and make men who follow it miserable, and also, but mentioned indirectly, to support, quote, traditional values, unquote, and support a version of masculinity where you are supposed to bottle up every emotion and that it's not okay to have feelings. This is simply not true. To understand this, one must look at what MGTOW and its downstream, the Manosphere, was created for, and what it's intended to teach men, and intended to accomplish. MGTOW, which is an acronym that stands for Men Going Their Own Way, is a lifestyle philosophy that's meant to teach men how to protect themselves against the pitfalls of marriage, relationships, and even dating, with the understanding that due to the way no-fault divorce, common law marriage works, and the risk factors of false accusations of sexual harassment or assault or impropriety, especially with Title IX and the general post-Me Too environment, that marriage, relationships, and to some extent even dating are no longer favorable. The specific intent of MGTOW is to protect men from all of these factors by promoting the lifestyle choice of being single, as in going your own way. MGTOW's answer to the system and its problems is in its acronym, Men Going Their Own Way. The point of MGTOW, and thus the Manosphere, is to teach you how to protect yourself and avoid all of the issues mentioned here, in hopes that by doing so, you will be able to have a prosperous, free, and peaceful life. The only thing that MGTOW does, or is supposed to do, is teach you and train you in understanding that there are risks that should be avoided, and that a marriage and relationship are not the prizes people think they are. It's not supposed to do anything else. That is up to the individual man that chooses this path in life for himself. Given that we MGTOWs have essentially created the wider manosphere and built it based on the ideas of MGTOWs, and those wishing to support MGTOW but not be MGTOWs themselves, the above points apply to the wider manosphere, or, quote, red pill, unquote, as a whole, irrespective of what some thought leader or podcaster or any group or faction within it might say, in particular towards the claims regarding, quote, traditional values, unquote. Not only is it not promoted or implicitly supported, it is explicitly opposed, as traditional values are nothing more than an extension of tradcon ideology, of which MGTOW has opposed for a while now, and continues to oppose it with good reason. The fact that MGTOW offers a wide degree of freedom, while also offering safety for all those who choose it, proves false the notion that it, or any downstream manosphere philosophy, seeks to isolate men and make them miserable, or do anything that makes their lives worse. With MGTOW, the only expectation is that you do the absolute bare minimum needed to be a part of it, and thus protected from the pitfalls mentioned before. It is not designed with love in mind, or for anyone seeking love or dating or anything similar, as it is not what MGTOW, and any of the other downstream manosphere-derived philosophies, are all about. To put it shortly, if you are here because you seek out love, in the sense of non-platonic relationships with women, or even men, you are here for the wrong reasons, and are in the wrong place. We do not offer this, and nor do we intend to do so. To move on to further of what she, Nyara, has said, she made the point of, quote, feminism is not the reason you're struggling, quote, and, quote, hating women is not going to fix your problems, quote. And I want to say to the first one, I have my own opinion on this. To say, you could technically argue that it isn't the fault of feminism or feminists, and you could technically argue that they inherited the position they are in from what happened before, and you could be correct in your argument, but that is not really saying anything, because in the end, the same system of wealth redistribution, via no-fault divorce, the trap of common law marriage, and the way the divorce and family courts work is still the same and still causes problems and suffering for men. To a guy who went through the entire divorce court system and is now forced to pay alimony, as well as losing custody of, and even visitation for his children, saying that feminism is not the reason he is suffering and in this situation to begin with, is effectively an answer that doesn't mean anything, or in other terms, a non-answer, as it doesn't address the problem, and is certainly not going to feel that way to such a person if you account for those in feminism who actually support the status quo and would defend it. You could argue that it was someone else who built the no-fault divorce system as we know it today, or you could argue that child custody, tender years doctrine, and even the no-fault divorce system is in itself an element of traditionalism or patriarchy via the, quote, men are providers and protectors logic. But even then, that wouldn't answer anything, as the primary beneficiaries of the current system are women, and if that system is supported, it is kind of hard to justify the claims of neutrality and uninvolvement. A good part of my point also applies to those men who weren't married but were in a long-term relationship and cohabitating and were screwed over by the laws and regulations of, quote, common law marriage, unquote, which is basically the idea that the state can consider you married, de facto married, even if you aren't and don't have the piece of paper saying you're married and never have the intent of being married or signing that piece of paper. And also dating or other similar stuff where you are basically under the risk of being falsely accused of things you didn't do if things go south. Many of these things, if not all of these, cause problems for us men and aren't being addressed. Whether you attribute that to feminism or something else is up to you, but it is highly questionable to assert total neutrality and lack of action if there are ideologues, especially radical feminist ideologues, who favor this, even if you could technically make the claim that a few ideologues do not represent all of feminism. Framing systemic issues as if they don't exist, and as if they are the fault of the people that are affected by them, is an ignorant way of thinking and shows a lack of understanding of what is going on and will not help solve these issues. To answer to the other point, nobody to my knowledge is seriously arguing that hating women would actually do anything of note to address the issues I pointed out. It's not going to amend no-fault divorce, it's not going to get rid of common law marriage, and it's certainly not going to defend the ideal of due process and innocence before being proven guilty. So it is not something that would be beneficial. You could at best make the argument that some hate women for their own reasons, be it personal ones, but this is not something that is encouraged, or something that we should advocate for, as it brings more harm than good and weakens our overall position. Hating women is a waste of time and effort, and because we recognize that, we do not push for it. It is illogical to define the entirety of the Manosphere, including MGTOW, by a minority of those actors who are in it. As mentioned previously, and to expand on my point, traditional values are of no concern to us and are not what we live up to defend, nor is it our job to do so, because it is an aspect of Tradcon ideology. We in MGTOW, and I would presume the wider Manosphere, are directly against Tradcon ideology because we believe in freedom, and we believe in our own set of values instead of those advocated for and imposed by outside factions. This also applies to the point about emotion and all other aspects of life. It is not a requirement for a man to bottle up emotions, nor do we consider emotions as being gay, as such a consideration would be illogical and uncivilized, and any such push would be contrary to the ideal within MGTOW, which is the maximum degree of freedom to go our own ways, and thus live life according to our own values. Stoicism is one of those values, but it is up to the individual man to adopt it for himself if that is what he chooses. Not something that should be pushed from top down, top to bottom, where anything deviating it is suppressed or discouraged. That is not how things in MGTOW and the Manosphere work. With regards to relationships, primarily speaking about non-platonic relationships with women, the kind that the majority of men due to sexual and romantic orientation tend to gravitate towards, them not being beneficial to men, and actually being detrimental, is not a mere matter of whether or not you enjoy or want to spend time with your partner. It is a matter of there being a huge risk of losing wealth and even property and any children produced in such relationships, should things fail due to the partner being heavily incentivized to break any agreed upon contract, thus being rewarded for it. And, let's be real, a marriage in real terms is a contract, and should be thought of as such. MGTOW, and everything that resulted because of it and formed from it, is fundamentally a cost-benefit analysis when it comes to evaluating if such relationships are worth it, and as it turns out, the risks outweigh any reward, and as such, this is why MGTOW advocates for being single, as a man. To address the other points, the problem with being told to find, quote, role models, unquote, and, quote, supportive communities, unquote, is that for the past while, the idea of a male identity independent of and not tied to traditional norms and what, quote, benefits, unquote, women, or is in line with what they want, has been attacked and suppressed. In particular, the male-only spaces that once existed. The situation is now that the term real man and quote, manning up, unquote, is synonymous with subservience and with doing whatever is being requested of those that use it, be it society in the form of societal expectations or a good portion of women and most tradcons, as both groups tend to also use these terms of whether or not you're a real man or whether you're manning up, that kind of bullshit. The transformation of the once male-only spaces into mixed spaces, and the attempts at discrediting any real and independent form of male identity is, in my view, the reason why it's hard to find said, quote, role models, unquote, and, quote, supportive communities, unquote, and why those like Andrew Tate, pickup artists and charlatans who seek to take advantage of those who follow them, have gained prominence. When mentioning the point of those who would offer scapegoats instead of solutions, or those who would coddle or otherwise use us or our own worries and issues for monetary gain, or for their own grifting, one has to consider that the group of people most likely to do this are the pickup artists and the dating coaches that many would be fooled into recommending. It is the pickup artists who keep writing stupid books and courses on how to get laid or, quote, manipulate, unquote, female psychology, which at best is dishonorable and deceptive, as it involves gaining something through trickery and deceit instead of honorably gaining it by earning it through putting time and effort towards that goal, and at worst, puts you at a significantly higher risk of being accused of sexual harassment or assault, as many of the pickup artist, quote, methods, unquote, could be described and will likely be seen as exactly that. Not listening to the pickup artists and calling them out is in our interests. As for the desires for love and affection argument, I don't think it needs further mentioning, explaining, or discussing, as it has already been mentioned ad nauseum as to why MGTOW and the entire Manosphere, as a result, is not here for that. If one really wants love, and despite all of the things proving it to the contrary, still thinks non-platonic relationships with women, or in my view, with anyone for that matter, are, quote, worth it, unquote, they should find other communities for that purpose. Regarding gender norms and women reinforcing them, I believe that any imposition of anything, including, quote, traditional, unquote, gender norms, should be fought against and opposed, even just on principle, simply because we should not be tolerant of those who want and seek out to impose their ways of life on us and impose upon us their values, because we have our own. Opposing the imposition and reinforcement of external ways of life, especially when we have our own ways of life and our own values, is just normal and par for the course for those of us in MGTOW. Finally, the idea that the spaces associated with MGTOW and the Manosphere are actually incel and, quote, woman-hating, unquote, and that leaving it is somehow actually breaking free from the matrix is a false notion, because that is not what it was designed for. It was designed to protect men and men's interests, and there is no need to leave said spaces while it keeps doing that. In my answer to the tweet telling us to, quote, find a community that actually wants to help you understand yourself and the societal problems that cause so many of your struggles, unquote, the MGTOW community does exactly that. It is thanks to MGTOW that such a community could exist, and that the full potential of men is unleashed, instead of it being directed towards a limited and predetermined path in life. It is also very ironic that despite incels being called out, the tweet makes the mistake of promoting the same kind of entitlement mindset that led to the incels existing in the first place. This idea that people inherently deserve something and are deserving of it, instead of working towards it and putting effort into it, is in my opinion the biggest contributing factor as to why the incel problem as we know it exists, and why the pickup artist problem exists in addition to it, pushing the idea that you're worthy of things, or deserving, even if it is as harmless sounding as saying you're worthy of love, borders on this territory, and is why I have reservations. To the point of needing to understand your emotions and communicate and socialize properly, I believe this is best done with MGTOW and the Manosphere, and not without it, as MGTOW teaches you how to defend your interests and protect yourself, allowing you to focus on learning how to do these things later on. It is my belief that entitlement mindsets in general are bad, and that nobody is inherently owed or owes anyone else anything, and pushing such things would be a mistake. I also believe that MGTOW and the Manosphere is a force for good, and helps more than harms. I believe we're doing a good enough job at counteracting the tradcons and helping men defend their own interests, and give them the tools needed to help them avoid the pitfalls of marriage, long-term relationships, and cohabitation, as well as help them focus on their lives and live up to their full potential. I believe helping men begins with considering what our interests are collectively and as individuals, as a gender, and in my view, as a people, and from there, we could focus on what is good for us and what isn't. That is what MGTOW does, and that is what I hope the Manosphere will do, even 20 years onwards from the date of this video. I hope that we MGTOWs will be remembered positively, and will have a positive legacy when historians look back in the future. With that being said, this has been Igor MGTOW and Video Games. Like and subscribe and click the bell notifications on YouTube if you enjoyed the video, and follow me on odyssey.com, MGTOW.tv, Twitter and Rumble. And bye bye. Thanks for watching.